Becoming Naomi Leone, Chapter 16. A Team of Horses. Finalmente, said Fabiola, as I walked into the kitchen for breakfast. They would not tell us what they decided to carve until you got here. She turned back to the stove to flip a tortilla on what Graham called the black trivet. We wait until everyone is here, said Bernardo. Pedro winked at me. Here is the rest of us, said Graham, with Owen and Reuben right behind her. My carvings were all over the table. Bernardo scooted his chair and pulled another chair over so I could sit between him and Pedro. "'Kay?" said Flora. "What? Tell us." Bernardo started talking fast and excited in Spanish, and Pedro nodded. Then Pedro stood up and paced around the kitchen, describing something and using his hands to express his excitement, waving them around. All this made his big belly dance. Fabiola translated. A gigantic branch like a big tree. Instead of leaves, there will be pigs and birds and fish and crocodiles. The panther lying here, and an elephant sleeping there. Little parades, giraffes and monkeys all together. Pedro sat back down and reached over and hugged my shoulder. And on the top, continued Fabiola, un león, the king of beasts. It will be maravilloso, wonderful. I was definitely going to add maravilloso to the superb Spanish words list. Shh, shh, the neighbors, they could hear, said Pedro, putting his finger to his mustache. People are jealous and can steal our ideas. Naomi, you can come to the market with me, or stay and carve with these crazy men all day, said Graciela. I knew she was kidding. Aquí, I said, here. Graciela rolled her eyes. Bueno, como quieras, as you wish. She pulled the shade on the back door before she walked out. A few minutes later, Benny arrived. He backed a truck into the yard and unloaded tubs filled with twisted and gnarled, knotty and contorted red vegetables that didn't resemble any delicate little radish that came from Graham's garden. Graham stood over them with her hands on her hips. I have never seen anything like them in my life. Why, they look like giant, overgrown yams that went through a pretzel maker. I think some of these are as tall as Owen. Bernardo, Pedro, and Benny each dragged a big tub of radishes into Flora's kitchen. Owen and Ruben had the job of misting the radishes with water so they would not dry out. They both took this duty seriously and sat on the floor with their water bottles ready, waiting for the first cuts to be made. Bernardo grinned at me and rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Then he picked up a knife and started to carve. What happens to these radishes after the festival? Asked Graham. After the judging, each booth gives away the dolls and characters. It is good luck to have one of them on your table for a Christmas feast. But soon they dry up and must be thrown away. All that work and they only last a few days, said Graham, shaking her head. But of course, said Bernardo, it is for the joy of doing it, of participating, and for the prize if you win. The men's fingers were nimble, and I was amazed they didn't cut themselves. They twisted and turned the radishes as if they were on spools, making impressions that often left the radish with a face or a remarkable feature like an elephant's knee in a knotty whirl. Outside the radishes were dark and brownish red. As the men scraped off the layers of skin, they revealed the true red, the palest pinks, and in the heart of the radish, white. But the white was tainted, as if someone had tried to bleach a pink blouse, and around the edges of the seams, the faintest trace of rosy color remained. I watched the men make magic out of vegetable and copied them. The radishes cut like potatoes, only firmer, and gave way much easier than soap, which meant I made more mistakes. Benny said I could carve anything I liked, as long as it was an animal. I made little elephants, doves, bears, and squirrels, sticking at first to things I'd carved before. At the end of the day, we covered the radishes with damp towels and set them in coolers. The next day was the same. We worked for hours, laughing and talking and singing songs in Spanish. I didn't even care that I didn't know all the words. Fabiola, Graham, and Flora made food and lemonade. and when Owen and Ruben's excitement could not be contained, Graciela took them away to find lucky spiders. On the last day of carving, Benny brought in a radish that looked like a giant bulb. "What will you do with that?" I asked. "It is for the crown, the lion. We want you to carve it, to thank you for your idea." I looked at Pedro and Bernardo, and they nodded. I took the radish from Benny, knowing that this was an honor. I held it up and examined it. The lion could be sitting, facing us, with the front legs straight, and resting on its back legs. That way, I could carve the entire mane in a giant, jagged circle. "Yes," said Benny, "perfecto." I studied the radish again and made a few careful cuts. If I scraped a very thin layer of red in a long line, it curled slightly. Could I get a curly mane on El Leon? Leon. Thinking the name reminded me of the tiny thread of hope to which I clung. If my father came to the festival, would he see the radish tree full of animals and remember what he carved for us all those years ago? Would it make him happy? Would he like to know that his daughter was a carver too? "Today's the day," I whispered to Graham on the morning of the night of the radishes, waking her from her sound sleep. I had already dressed in my peasant blouse, jeans, and huaraches. Graham sat up and pulled the light blanket around herself. "Naomi, what time is it?" "Early, but I couldn't sleep." Graham ran her hands through her thin hair and cleared her throat. "There's something I want to say to you before you get going." I sat down next to her. "Graham, everything will be fine. Now let me talk. Lately, practical matters seem to be closing in on me." "Like what?" "Skyla might be right about a judge not wanting to separate a natural mother and her child, even after all the bad she's done. While I've been here, I have come to the conclusion that maybe I should be preparing you for that situation, just on the slim notion it might happen. I don't know how I would ever get along without you, but I'm more concerned with how you would get on without Owen and me." "But it will not come to that," I said firmly. "Let's just plant that in our brains." Graham laughed. "I am pleased you have adopted my positive attitudes, but even if we do find your father, I'm just not sure what kind of cake this mess will turn out to be. What if he wants you and Owen for himself? What if he wants you children to stay here with him? Then what?" "Then you'll have to stay with us," I said, kissing her on the cheek, "and you'll have to learn some more Spanish." After lunch, with Pedro, Bernardo, and Benny in the front seat, and Owen, Ruben, and me crowded into the back, we rode in the truck to the center of Oaxaca City. Behind us in the truck bed, the coolers held the mysterious radishes. We unloaded the coolers and tubs of supplies on a corner, and Bernardo drove the truck back to Barrio Halatlaco. He would walk the 13 blocks back to the town square with the woman. We looked like a caravan of horses plowing through a field of tourists, our arms full of supplies, coolers, a metal wash tub filled with radish leaves, bags with extra knives for last-minute tweaks, a big plastic bowl filled with moss, which we could use as a carpet for the scene. After finding our assigned table, the boys and I waited while the men checked in with the officials. El Zocalo was a square park bordered with large trees. Corralled in fancy black iron fences, their wide branches created deep shade. In the middle of the park, a fountain bubbled, and manicured hedges protected the flower beds dotted with blooms, yellow, red, orange, and white, like the rainbow of colors in a fruit vendor's stall at El Mercado. Next to the street, long tables had been set up for the festivities, surrounding the entire park for a block in each direction. In front of the tables, a raised wooden viewing platform ran along the side, with a metal railing to keep those Graham called the looky-loos at a reasonable distance back. Like a frame inside a frame inside a frame, the trees, tables, and viewing platforms boxed the entire park, with openings now and then through which people could pass. El Zocalo blazed with colorful paper flags and giant balloon bouquets. I looked at every man who passed on the street. Our father could be any of them. He could even be a man pretending to be our father, and I wouldn't know the difference, would I? Benny, Pedro, and I spread the moss on the table. Owen and Ruben took their posts with their water bottles, waiting to spray something, anything. It wasn't long before Graciela, Flora, Fabiola, Graham, and Bernardo arrived. I looked up at Bernardo. "I want to stay and help set up." "It is more important that you are with Fabiola and the others to ask about your father," said Bernardo. "All the carving is done. I promise we'll make it look beautiful. And then you'll be surprised, like the other turistas. There is much for you to see as well." The judging wasn't until 5 o'clock, so we had time to start at the stall next to ours and walk slowly on the viewing platform around the entire park, along with hundreds of other people. The carvers added their final touches to their scenes and began to put out their secret best that they had held back until the last minute. "I just can't believe that every detail of every figure has been made from a radish or some part of it," said Graham. "It is true," said Fabiola. "It is forbidden to use anything else. One year, someone used a carrot to carve a figure for color, and they were eliminated from the competition." I could hear the comments of the tourists as they stood near us. "Remarkable, magnificent, unbelievable." And it was all those things. Dolls dressed in elaborate gowns, musicians with trumpets, nativity scenes with Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, plus the sheep and camels and wise men. Bandits riding wild, rearing horses, tall angels holding harps, Christ dying on a cross. School buses with children waving from the windows, a 5-foot cathedral with the saints carved into the walls, just like the giant cathedral nearby. All made from giant radishes. Fabiola and Graciela asked at each booth about our father. They found many who knew him well, but none who had seen him recently. With every person who shook their head, Graham's face nodded politely, as if to say, "That's okay," but her eyes were telling me a different story. As we slowly inched closer to our own booth, I took Graham's hand and squeezed it. She looked at me, downhearted. "We're running out of time, Naomi."